Standing in the middle of Denver International Airport at 5:45 a.m., watching my husband Carter's black Tesla disappear into the Colorado sunrise through the massive terminal windows, I felt something shatter inside my chest. Not my heart, that had already broken into 1,000 pieces 4 hours earlier when I discovered the credit card statements hidden in his desk drawer. What was breaking now was something deeper, something that had been holding me together through 12 years of marriage. The last thread of the woman who believed his lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. By the time I walked onto that plane 6 hours later, settled into first-class seat 2 a while, Carter squeezed into economy row 31, frantically texting someone who wasn't me, I had already rewritten the ending to our entire relationship. The look on his face when he saw me there, perfectly composed, sipping champagne and clearly thriving, while he shuffled past with his carry-on bag toward the back of the plane, was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building my architectural firm, while he was apparently building something else entirely, with someone else's money. Our money. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins, because what Carter thought would be the perfect cover for his financial betrayal became the perfect opportunity for me to discover exactly how strong I really was. This morning started like so many others in our Boulder home, with Carter rushing around the kitchen, gulping his third cup of coffee while his phone buzzed incessantly with what he claimed were urgent client messages. I was methodically checking my luggage one final time, making sure I had everything for our anniversary trip to Paris, a celebration of 15 years together that I had been planning for months. "Evie, we really need to leave in the next 10 minutes, Carter said without looking up from his screen, his voice carrying that edge of impatience that had become increasingly familiar over the past year. You know how brutal Denver traffic can be, and with construction on I-70, we're looking at least 90 minutes to DIA. I nodded, zipping up my carry-on bag that contained the architectural portfolio I'd prepared for a potential consulting opportunity I'd discovered in Paris. Sievers and Associates, my firm, had grown from a one-woman operation 5 years ago into a boutique architectural consultancy specializing in sustainable residential design. This Paris connection could open doors to European markets I'd only dreamed of accessing. "I still can't believe you managed to get us both upgraded to business class," I said, double-checking our boarding passes on my phone. "That must have cost a fortune." Carter's fingers paused over his phone screen for just a fraction of a second, a micro-expression I caught, but didn't understand yet. "Yeah, well, you only celebrate 15 years once, right? Besides, with the Morrison Project bonus coming through, we can afford to splurge a little." The Morrison Project, Carter's architectural consulting firm, had supposedly landed their biggest commercial development contract ever, a mixed-use complex in downtown Denver that would keep him busy for the next 18 months. He'd been working late almost every night for weeks, coming home exhausted and distracted, claiming the client demands were unprecedented. I should have paid more attention to those late nights. I should have questioned why a man who'd always been methodical about sharing project details suddenly became secretive about his work. I should have wondered why our joint credit card statements had become too boring for me to review, why Carter had suddenly taken over all our financial management to reduce my stress. But I didn't question any of it, because I was busy building something real while he was apparently building something else entirely. We drove to the airport in comfortable silence, Carter's playlist of classic rock filling the space between us, while I reviewed my notes for the Paris meetings. The sunrise over the Rocky Mountains was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Colorado's natural beauty. It was the same beauty that had inspired my architectural philosophy of designing homes that worked with the landscape rather than against it. "Nervous about the trip?" Carter asked as we pulled into the departure area, his voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. "Excited," I corrected, the same way I always did when he assumed my feelings. "This could be the opportunity that takes Sievers and Associates international. I've been preparing for months." He smiled, but something about it felt rehearsed, like he was performing the role of supportive husband rather than actually being one. "You'll knock them dead, Evie, you always do." The kiss he gave me before I got out of the car tasted like coffee and something else, something metallic that I would later recognize as the taste of guilt. He handed me my luggage with hands that trembled slightly, though I attributed it to too much caffeine rather than nerves about whatever he was really planning. "See you at the gate," he said, already pulling away from the curb before I had fully closed the passenger door. Denver International Airport was already bustling with early morning travelers, business people heading to important meetings, families beginning vacations, couples starting romantic getaways. I moved through the security line with the efficient confidence of someone who traveled frequently for work, grateful for my TSA pre-check status, and the extra time it would give me to grab breakfast before our 9:15 departure. That's when I made the discovery that would change everything. Sitting in a quiet corner of the food court with my green tea and breakfast sandwich, I opened my laptop to review the Paris presentation materials one final time. My email notifications showed several new messages, including one from our credit card company about a large transaction alert. I clicked on it absently, expecting to see the charge for our flight upgrades. Instead, I saw a payment of $12,000 to Rodriguez Financial Consulting dated yesterday, followed by another $8,000 charge to a Rodriguez Personal Services from 3 days ago. Below those were dozens of smaller charges over the past 6 months, all to variations of the same name: Rodriguez Consulting Arkansas Financial, Rodriguez and Associates. My hands stopped moving across the keyboard as my brain tried to process what I was seeing. Carter had told me repeatedly that our finances were tight, that we needed to be careful about spending while his firm built up the Morrison project reserves. He'd convinced me to postpone upgrading my office equipment, to delay hiring the additional staff I needed, to put off the marketing expansion that could have grown Sievers and Associates faster. Meanwhile, he had apparently been funneling thousands of dollars to someone named Rodriguez for services he'd never mentioned. I opened our banking app with fingers that had begun to shake, entering the password Carter didn't know I'd memorized when I caught a glimpse of him entering it months ago. What I found there made the airport food court fade away around me as my carefully constructed world began to collapse. The woman who had kissed her husband goodbye 20 minutes earlier was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about her marriage was a lie. The months leading up to our anniversary trip had followed a pattern I now recognized with painful clarity. Carter would come home from work increasingly late, claiming the Morrison project required evening meetings with investors and city planning committees. He'd kiss me absently on the forehead, grab a beer from the refrigerator, and disappear into his home office to catch up on paperwork. I had accepted this routine because I understood the demands of running an architectural practice. My own firm, Sievers and Associates, had consumed my evenings for years as I built it from a single client freelance operation into a respected name in sustainable residential design. The difference was that I shared my challenges with Carter, celebrating small victories, strategizing through difficult clients, discussing the financial pressures of growth. Carter had stopped sharing. "How was your day?" I would ask over dinner, the same question I'd been asking for 15 years. "Complicated," he'd respond, pushing food around his plate. "The Morrison people are demanding, but it's good money, really good money." I had learned not to push for detail. 6 months ago, my questions about his work had been met with increasingly defensive responses. "You wouldn't understand the commercial side," he'd say, "or it's just boring technical stuff, Evie. Nothing like your creative residential projects." So I had retreated into my own work, finding satisfaction in designing homes that captured Colorado's natural beauty while minimizing environmental impact. My latest project, a net-zero energy home in Aspen, had been featured in Architectural Digest and brought in 3 new high-end clients. I was proud of what I'd built, even if Carter seemed increasingly disinterested in hearing about it. The financial changes had started subtly. Carter suggested we consolidate our credit cards to streamline our finances and improve our credit score. He offered to take over bill paying and investment management to reduce my workload so I could focus on growing my business. These gestures felt supportive, even romantic, a husband stepping up to handle the tedious aspects of adult life. "Let me worry about the money stuff," he'd say, when I offered to review our monthly statements. "You've got enough on your plate with the Aspen project and the new client meetings. I had trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? In 15 years of marriage, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Carter had never given me reason to doubt his integrity. He was methodical, responsible, and had always been transparent about our financial situation. When he said we needed to be more careful with spending while his firm invested in the Morrison project, I believed him. When he suggested I postpone hiring the additional architect I desperately needed, because cash flow might be tight for a few months, I agreed. When he convinced me to delay upgrading my computer system because the old equipment still works fine, I accepted his logic. When he insisted we skip our usual vacation to Cabo, because we should save money for the big anniversary trip instead, I thought he was being romantic and financially prudent. I had no idea he was systematically draining our joint accounts to fund something he was hiding from me. The morning of our trip, I woke up early to finish packing and review my presentation materials one final time. The Paris opportunity had come through a former colleague, Julia Owen, who now worked for an international firm specializing in eco-luxury resorts. She'd called me 3 weeks ago with an exciting proposition. "Evie, I've got something that could change everything for you," Julia had said, her voice crackling through the international connection from her office in France. "We're designing a series of luxury eco-resorts across Europe, and we need someone with your expertise in sustainable residential architecture. The client wants each resort to feel like a collection of private homes, rather than a traditional hotel complex. The project would require adapting my residential design philosophy to hospitality architecture, creating structures that felt intimate and homelike, while meeting the operational needs of luxury accommodations." It was exactly the kind of challenge that excited me professionally, and could establish Sievers and Associates as a player in the international market. "They want to meet with you in Paris next week," Julia continued. "I know it's short notice, but the timeline is accelerated, because they want to break ground on the first location this fall." I had immediately started planning the trip around our anniversary, seeing it as perfect timing. Carter and I could celebrate 15 years of marriage, while I pursued the opportunity that could define the next phase of my career. He had seemed genuinely excited about the idea, suggesting we extend the trip a few days to explore France together. "This could be huge for you," he'd said, pulling up flight options on his laptop. "And Paris in spring, perfect anniversary setting." Within hours, he'd booked our flights, reserved a romantic hotel near the Champs-Élysées, and even arranged for business class upgrades. His enthusiasm felt authentic, and I was touched by his support for my career ambitions. It reminded me of the early years of our marriage when we'd spent hours discussing our professional dreams and supporting each other's goals. The morning routine that final day followed our established pattern. Carter made coffee while checking his phone. I organized my travel documents and presentation materials, and we moved around our Boulder kitchen with the comfortable choreography of a long marriage. The house itself was one of my early design projects, an open-concept space with floor-to-ceiling windows that captured views of the Flatirons while maximizing natural light and energy efficiency. "Are you sure you have everything?" Carter asked, his tone carrying the familiar note of someone who'd been married long enough to know his spouse's tendencies. "Passport, presentation materials, that lucky necklace you always wear to important meetings." I touched the simple silver pendant that had been my grandmother's, grateful he'd remembered such a small detail. These moments of attentiveness were part of why I'd fallen in love with him. Carter noticed things, remembered what mattered to me, paid attention to the details that many men overlooked. Looking back now, I realize he was probably just anxious to get me to the airport and out of town so he could proceed with whatever he had planned. But in that moment, it felt like care. The drive to Denver International Airport should have been one of those comfortable married couple moments that I'd cherish later, two people heading off on their anniversary trip, excited about both romance and new opportunities. Instead, it became a masterclass in how well Carter had learned to lie to my face. "I still can't get over how you managed to swing the business class upgrades," I said, as we merged onto I-70, watching the morning light play across the mountains. The airline website was showing them as completely sold out when I checked last week. Carter's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, though at the time I attributed it to his usual stress about airport traffic. "I called the airline directly," he said, his voice carrying that confident tone he used when discussing his professional accomplishments. "Sometimes you can work with a human agent to find options that don't show up online. Plus, with my business travel status from all the Morrison Project trips, I have some pull with customer service." The Morrison Project trips. Another detail I had accepted without question, even though Carter's firm had traditionally focused on local Denver developments. When he'd started traveling to supposedly scout locations for this major commercial project, I'd been proud of his expanding business. I'd even helped him research sustainable building materials and energy-efficient design elements that might impress his new clients. "Are you nervous about the presentation tomorrow?" he asked, changing the subject with the smooth efficiency of someone practiced in redirection. "More excited than nervous," I replied, pulling out my phone to review my notes one more time. "Julia says the development group is specifically looking for architects who can create luxury accommodations that feel residential rather than commercial. It's exactly what I've been doing with the Aspen project, just on a larger scale." "They'd be crazy not to hire you," Carter said, and for a moment his smile seemed genuine. "You're the most talented architect I know, Evie. This could really put Sievers and Associates on the map internationally." I reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of affection for the man who had supported my career dreams even when they required sacrifices from both of us. Early in our marriage, I'd worked 60-hour weeks building my reputation while Carter picked up extra freelance projects to cover our expenses. When I'd struggled with a difficult client who nearly bankrupted my fledgling firm, Carter had helped me negotiate a settlement that saved my business. He understood the architecture world, respected my ambitions, and had always been my biggest advocate. Or so I had believed. "I was thinking," Carter continued, "after your meeting tomorrow maybe we could explore the Moraes district. I read that it has some incredible examples of historic preservation mixed with modern development. Right up your alley professionally." His thoughtfulness touched me. Carter had clearly been researching Paris architecture to make our trip more meaningful to my professional interests. These were the gestures that had made me fall in love with him, the way he paid attention to what mattered to me, and found ways to incorporate my passions into our shared experiences. "That sounds perfect," I said, already imagining walking through centuries-old streets, while discussing the balance between preservation and innovation that defined the best architectural practices. We pulled into the departure area at DIA, and Carter handed the keys to the valet, with the efficient movements of someone eager to get through the airport routine. He seemed unusually focused on time, checking his watch repeatedly, and scanning the terminal entrance, as if looking for someone. "Are you expecting to see someone?" I asked, noticing his distracted behavior. "Just keeping an eye out for crowds," he said quickly. "You know how crazy this place gets, especially on international departure days." He lifted my suitcase from the trunk with unnecessary urgency, then pulled his own bag out so quickly that it nearly toppled over. His movements had an edge of nervous energy that I'd never seen before our travels. Usually Carter was methodical about airport procedures, double-checking everything and moving with deliberate calm. "Carter, slow down," I said, laughing at his unusual rush. "Our flight doesn't board for another 3 hours. We have plenty of time." I know, he replied, but he was already heading toward the terminal entrance. "I just want to make sure we get through security smoothly and have time to grab breakfast. You know how you get when you're hungry before a big presentation." This was true. I did get cranky when my blood sugar dropped, and Carter had learned to anticipate my needs over 15 years of marriage. But something about his reasoning felt forced, as if he was giving me explanations he'd rehearsed rather than expressing genuine concern. At the departure curb, he kissed me goodbye with what I interpreted as romantic spontaneity. "Go ahead and get in line for security," he said, already pulling away toward the parking area. "I'll meet you at the gate after I park the car." "Don't you want to check in together?" I asked, surprised by the sudden separation. "The lines will be shorter if we split up," he said, his voice carrying that practical tone he used when solving logistical problems. "Besides, you've got TSA pre-check and I don't. No point in both of us waiting in the regular security line." This made sense from an efficiency standpoint, though it felt strange to begin our anniversary trip by immediately going separate ways. But Carter had always been practical about travel logistics, and I appreciated his thoughtfulness about getting me through the airport quickly so I could prepare for my presentation. "See you at gate B23, I called after him, watching his black Tesla disappear into the parking structure. I shouldered my carry-on bag and headed into the terminal, feeling excited about the adventure ahead. Paris in spring, a potentially career-defining business opportunity, and a romantic anniversary celebration with the man I'd loved for 15 years. Everything was perfectly planned and aligned. I had no idea that Carter's careful planning had nothing to do with our anniversary, and everything to do with creating the perfect cover for whatever he was really doing while I was out of the country. Moving through Denver International Airport's security checkpoint, I felt the familiar surge of confidence that came with traveling for business. The TSA pre-check line moved efficiently, and within 20 minutes I was settling into a quiet corner of the food court with my laptop open, reviewing the presentation that could transform Sievers and Associates from a regional firm into an international player. The portfolio spread across my small table represented 5 years of strategic growth and careful positioning. When I'd started my firm, I was just another architect in a city full of talented designers. What set me apart was my commitment to sustainable design principles that didn't sacrifice luxury or comfort. My homes worked with Colorado's natural environment rather than fighting against it, using passive solar design, locally sourced materials and energy systems that reduced environmental impact while creating stunning living spaces. The breakthrough had come with the Aspen project 18 months ago. A tech entrepreneur wanted a mountain retreat that would achieve net zero energy consumption, while providing the kind of sophisticated entertaining spaces his lifestyle required. Most architects had told him to choose between environmental responsibility and luxury. I had shown him how to have both. The resulting home was a masterpiece of sustainable design: geothermal heating and cooling, solar panels integrated seamlessly into the roofline, reclaimed wood and stone that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. When Architectural Digest featured it as their home of the year, the phone at Sievers and Associates hadn't stopped ringing. "Evelyn Sievers has created something remarkable," the article had read. "A home that proves sustainability and luxury aren't opposing forces, but complementary elements of thoughtful design." That feature had led to 3 more high-end residential projects, each one building my reputation as an architect who could deliver both environmental innovation and the kind of sophisticated aesthetics that wealthy clients demanded. The Vail Ski Lodge with its living roof that bloomed with wildflowers each spring. The Boulder estate that generated more energy than it consumed while providing 8,000 square feet of stunning living space. The Fort Collins home that incorporated recycled materials so seamlessly that visitors never suspected they were standing in one of the most environmentally responsible houses in Colorado. Each project had been more ambitious than the last, and each had proven that my design philosophy could scale to meet any challenge, which was exactly why Julia Owen's call 3 weeks ago had felt like destiny. "The European Eco-Resort project is massive, Evie," she had explained during our video call, her excitement evident even through the grainy international connection. 12 properties across France, Italy, and Switzerland. Each one needs to feel like an exclusive collection of private homes rather than a traditional hotel. The developer wants guests to feel like they're staying in the most beautiful residential architecture in Europe, but with 5-star amenities and environmental impact that's actually carbon negative. I had felt my pulse quicken as Julia described the scope. This wasn't just about designing buildings, it was about creating a new model for luxury hospitality that could influence the entire industry. "They've seen your Architectural Digest feature and the sustainability awards you've won," Julia continued. "The lead developer specifically mentioned your ability to create invisible sustainability environmental innovation that enhances rather than compromises the aesthetic experience." The phrase invisible sustainability had become my professional trademark. Too many green buildings announced their environmental consciousness with obvious solar panels, exposed recycling systems, and materials that looked aggressively natural. My approach was different. I created homes that felt luxurious and sophisticated first, with the sustainability woven so seamlessly into the design that it enhanced rather than competed with the beauty. Sitting in the airport food court, I reviewed the presentation materials I'd crafted specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The portfolio showed how my residential design philosophy could translate to hospitality architecture, private villa suites that felt like mountain retreats, common areas that captured the intimacy of a luxury home's great room, and spa facilities that seemed to emerge organically from their natural settings. The financial projections Julia had shared were staggering. The initial contract for designing the first 3 properties would be worth more than Sievers and Associates had earned in its entire 5-year existence. If the partnership expanded to include all 12 resorts, it would establish my firm as a major player in international sustainable design. But more than the money, this project represented validation of everything I'd been working toward. For years I'd been proving that sustainable design could be beautiful, that environmental responsibility could enhance rather than limit architectural possibilities. This European project would take that message to a global audience and potentially influence how luxury hospitality approached environmental issues worldwide. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny, my project manager back in Boulder. Final permits came through for the Morrison Avenue house. Construction starts Monday. Also, 3 new potential clients called after seeing the Architectural Digest online feature. Building sustainable luxury is definitely having a moment. I smiled, feeling grateful for the team I'd assembled. Danny had joined Sievers and Associates 2 years ago, bringing construction management expertise that had streamlined our project delivery and improved client satisfaction. She understood that luxury clients expected perfection not just in design but in execution and timeline management. The irony wasn't lost on me that my career was reaching new heights just as my marriage was apparently falling apart. I'd built a business based on creating harmony between competing forces, sustainability and luxury, innovation and tradition, modern living and environmental responsibility. Yet I'd completely failed to recognize the disharmony growing in my own relationship. But sitting there surrounded by my presentation materials, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete confidence in my professional abilities. Whatever challenges awaited in Paris, I was prepared to meet them. I had the portfolio, the experience, and the vision to convince the development group that Sievers and Associates could deliver exactly what they needed. I opened my laptop to review the technical specifications one more time, double-checking the sustainable building materials research and energy efficiency calculations that would support my design proposals. This level of preparation had become my trademark, arriving at every meeting with not just beautiful visuals, but concrete data proving that my innovative approaches actually worked. The terminal around me buzzed with travelers heading to destinations across the globe, each carrying their own dreams and ambitions. In a few hours I would be among them, flying toward an opportunity that could define the rest of my career. What I didn't know yet was that my husband was planning to use my absence to redefine our entire relationship. I was reviewing the environmental impact calculations for the 3rd time when my phone buzzed with an email notification that would shatter my carefully constructed world. The sender was our credit card company, American Express, with the subject line "Large Transaction Alert, Immediate Attention Required." My finger hovered over the notification for a moment. Carter handled most of our financial alerts now, part of his effort to streamline our money management so I could focus on growing Sievers and Associates, but he wasn't here, and the email was marked urgent. I opened it expecting to see a charge for our flight upgrades, or perhaps the Paris hotel reservation. Instead I stared at a transaction that made no sense. Rodriguez Luxury Services, $15,000, transaction date: yesterday, 11:47 p.m., $15,000. To someone named Rodriguez, processed less than 12 hours ago. My coffee grew cold as I read the transaction details twice, then 3 times, hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Carter had told me our finances were tight, that we needed to be conservative about spending while his firm invested in the Morrison project. Yet here was a charge for $15,000 to a service provider I'd never heard him mention. With trembling fingers, I logged into our American Express account, using the password I'd memorized months ago when I caught a glimpse of Carter entering it. What I found there made the busy airport terminal fade away around me as my blood pressure dropped and my vision narrowed. The transaction history read like a catalog of financial betrayal. Rodriguez Luxury Services, $15,000. Yesterday, Rodriguez Consulting Dits $8,500. 1 week ago, Rodriguez Financial Planning digs $12,000. 2 weeks ago, Our Professional Services, $6,800. 3 weeks ago, the pattern went back 6 months, dozens of payments ranging from $3,000 to $15,000, all to variations of the same name. While Carter had been telling me we couldn't afford to hire additional staff for my firm, couldn't upgrade my computer equipment, couldn't invest in the marketing that would grow Sievers and Associates, he had been systematically funneling tens of thousands of dollars to someone whose services he'd never mentioned. I opened our joint banking app, my architect's mind automatically calculating totals and patterns. The transfers were even more extensive there, regular withdrawals from our savings account, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic notifications to both account holders. $4,900 here, $4,800 there, never $5,000, which would have sent me an alert. Carter wasn't just hiding expenses. He was systematically draining our accounts using someone else's services, and he was sophisticated enough about banking systems to avoid detection. This wasn't impulse spending or poor financial judgment. This was calculated, methodical, and had been going on for months while he convinced me to postpone investments in my own business. My hands shook as I scrolled through transaction after transaction, each one representing a deliberate choice to prioritize mysterious Rodriguez services over our shared financial goals. The total was staggering, nearly $180,000 transferred over 6 months to various Rodriguez entities. I thought about every conversation where Carter had expressed concern about our finances, every time he'd suggested I delay hiring the CAD specialist I desperately needed, every time he'd convinced me to postpone the office expansion that would have allowed Sievers and Associates to take on larger projects, every time he'd made me feel guilty for wanting to invest in marketing that could have brought in new clients. Meanwhile, he had been spending our money, my money, earned through late nights and weekend work sessions, building my architectural practice, on services from someone I'd never heard of. The worst part wasn't the money, though $180,000 represented nearly 2 years of careful savings and business profits. The worst part was the systematic deception, the way he'd looked me in the eye night after night and expressed concern about our financial situation, while secretly funding whatever Rodriguez was providing. I pulled up my laptop and searched for Rodriguez Luxury Services and AR Professional Services. The results were sparse, a few generic business listings with addresses in downtown Denver, services described vaguely as personal consulting and lifestyle management. Nothing that explained why my husband would spend our life savings on these mysterious services. Then I searched for a Rodriguez, combined with Denver and consulting, and found a LinkedIn profile that made my stomach drop. Adriana Rodriguez, personal life coach and relationship consultant, helping clients navigate major life transitions with discretion and expertise. Her profile photo showed a striking woman in her early 30s with dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested she was very good at whatever she did. Her listed specialties included marriage transition planning, financial reorganization for major life changes, and discreet personal consulting for high-net-worth individuals. Marriage transition planning, financial reorganization for major life changes. Carter wasn't just hiding expenses, he was paying someone to help him plan our divorce while keeping me completely unaware of what was coming. Every dollar he'd spent on Rodriguez services was an investment in ending our marriage on terms that would benefit him while leaving me unprepared and financially disadvantaged. The woman who had kissed her husband goodbye 45 minutes earlier had believed she was heading to Paris for their anniversary celebration. The woman staring at her laptop screen in Denver International Airport now understood that she was apparently heading to Paris alone, while her husband used her absence to finalize plans to destroy their life together. But Carter had made one crucial miscalculation. He had underestimated the investigative skills that came with being a successful architect, and he had no idea that his wife was about to use every professional connection and strategic thinking ability she possessed to turn his own plan against him. Sitting in that airport food court, staring at evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The shock was giving way to something more useful, the methodical problem-solving mindset that had built Sievers and Associates from nothing into a respected architectural firm. Carter had made a critical error. He'd assumed that his wife was just a creative type who didn't understand finance or technology. What he'd forgotten was that running a successful architectural practice required exactly the kind of investigative skills and strategic thinking I was about to use against him. I opened a new browser tab and began what I privately called due diligence research, the same systematic investigation process I used when vetting potential clients or analyzing construction contractors. First step, understand exactly who Adriana Rodriguez was and what services she actually provided. Her LinkedIn profile was professionally crafted but revealed more than she probably intended. Education at University of Colorado Business School, followed by a certification in personal life transition consulting from an online program. Previous work experience included financial planning for a divorce attorney's office and lifestyle coordination for several Denver area professionals. But it was her client testimonials that made my blood run cold. Adriana helped me navigate the most difficult period of my life with discretion and strategic planning that protected my interests completely. Client LM. The financial reorganization strategies were invaluable. I entered the process prepared and confident, while my former spouse was completely unprepared for what was coming. Client DS 5 stars for discretion and results. Adriana's pre-planning services made what could have been a messy situation very clean and favorable. Client RH. Carter wasn't just planning to leave me, he was paying someone to help him orchestrate a divorce that would leave me financially devastated while he walked away with maximum assets and minimal obligations. I pulled up my notes app and began documenting everything systematically, the same way I tracked project details for complex architectural builds. Transaction amounts, dates, Rodriguez's business entities, the timeline of Carter's behavioral changes, every detail that could be relevant to understanding the full scope of his deception. Next, I accessed our shared Google Drive account where Carter stored financial documents. He'd given me access years ago for tax preparation purposes, and had apparently forgotten that I still had it. What I found there made me understand that his planning was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. Hidden in a folder labeled Morrison Project Files were documents that had nothing to do with any commercial development. A detailed inventory of our assets, including my business equipment and client contracts, copies of our homeowners' insurance policies with my jewelry and art collection appraised separately, screenshots of my social media posts from the past year, apparently documenting times I'd traveled for business research on Colorado divorce law, specifically regarding business ownership and asset division. Carter had been building a case against me for months, documenting anything that could be used to argue that my business success was separate from our marriage or that my travel schedule indicated marital neglect. He'd even photographed my home office setup and research materials, probably planning to claim that I'd used marital funds inappropriately for business purposes. But the most damning document was a timeline labeled Transition Planning that laid out his strategy in clinical detail. Phase 1, completed, establish separate financial accounts and redirect funds. Phase 2 in progress, document spouse's professional obligations requiring extended travel. Phase 3 scheduled. Initiate discussions during spouse's absence to minimize immediate emotional response. Phase 4 planned, present. Completed financial reorganization as established fact. Today was Phase 3. Carter was planning to call me in Paris and inform me that our marriage was over, presenting it as a mutual decision that had already been legally and financially structured. By the time I returned to Denver, the divorce papers would be filed, our assets would be protected in his favor, and I would be facing a legal situation I was completely unprepared for. Except now I was prepared. I opened my phone's contacts and scrolled to Margaret Hobbs, the family law attorney who had handled the legal structure for Seavers and Associates when I incorporated the business. Margaret was known throughout Denver as someone who didn't lose, especially when representing women whose husbands had underestimated them. "Margaret, it's Evelyn Seavers," I said, when she answered, keeping my voice low despite the airport noise around me. "I need to speak with you urgently about a family matter." "Of course, Evelyn. What's going on?" "I've just discovered that my husband has been systematically hiding assets and working with a consultant to plan our divorce without my knowledge. I have documentation of financial transfers, asset inventories, and what appears to be a coordinated strategy to leave me disadvantaged in divorce proceedings." There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice took on the sharp tone I'd heard her use in business negotiations. How much documentation do you have, and how recent is this activity? Extensive documentation going back 6 months, with the most recent transfer yesterday. Margaret, we're talking about nearly $200,000 that he's moved without my knowledge, plus strategic planning that suggests he intends to initiate divorce proceedings while I'm out of the country. Where are you now? Denver International Airport. I'm supposed to be flying to Paris for our anniversary trip and a business meeting, but I'm beginning to think this trip is part of his strategy. Don't get on that plane, Evelyn. Not yet. Can you come to my office immediately? What your husband has done may constitute financial fraud in the context of marriage, and if he's planning to serve you with papers while you're internationally, we need to beat him to the courthouse. I'll be there in an hour, I said, already gathering my materials and heading toward the exit. As I walked away from gate B23 where Carter was expecting me to meet him, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete clarity about what needed to happen next. Carter had spent 6 months planning the perfect divorce. He was about to discover that his wife was more formidable than he'd ever imagined. Walking toward the airport exit, my phone rang with Carter's name appearing on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I realized this call was an opportunity to gather more information, while he still believed his plan was working perfectly. Hey babe, his voice carried the casual warmth of someone who thought he was in complete control of the situation. I'm at the gate, and don't see you anywhere. Did you get held up in security? I paused outside the terminal, watching other travelers rush past me toward their destinations, while I stood at the crossroads of my entire future. Actually, I'm dealing with a small crisis, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. One of my biggest clients just called with an emergency about the Vail project. There might be permit issues that could shut down construction. Oh no, Carter said, and his concern sounded genuine enough that for a split second I wondered if I'd misunderstood everything. How serious is it? Potentially very serious. I might need to delay the Paris trip by a day or two to handle this properly. I watched his reaction carefully, listening for any hint of relief in his voice that would confirm my suspicions. Evie, you can't miss this meeting with the European developers, he said. But there was something underneath his supportive tone, a tension that suggested he needed me on that plane, for reasons that had nothing to do with my career success. Can't Danny handle the permit situation? That's why you have a project manager. Danny's good, but this requires the principal architect's signature and direct client relationship. I replied, using the kind of technical language that Carter usually accepted without question. The client specifically requested that I handle this personally. There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. Which client is this again? The question surprised me. Carter had always been detail-oriented about my work, but he'd never needed clarification about my major projects before. It was the kind of question someone might ask if they were trying to verify whether my story was true. The Morrison family, I said, deliberately using the same name as his fictional commercial project. You know the net zero mountain home we discussed over dinner last week. Right. The Morrison project. His voice relaxed slightly. Well, if it's that serious, I guess we don't have a choice. Should I cancel my ticket too? Come back and help you deal with this. This was the moment of truth. If Carter was genuinely planning an anniversary trip, he would want to reschedule together. If he had other plans for my absence, he would find reasons to continue to Paris alone. Actually, you should go ahead, I said. Carefully. Your business with the Patterson Group is important too, and there's no point in both of us missing our opportunities. We can reschedule the romantic part of the trip once both our work situations are resolved. The Patterson Group, another fictional business entity I'd invented to test whether Carter would question details he should know if his stories were true. You're probably right, he said, and I caught a note of what sounded like relief. The Patterson meetings are pretty critical for the firm's expansion plans. And Paris will be just as romantic in a few weeks, right? Absolutely. You focus on your meetings, I'll handle the permit crisis, and we'll plan an even better trip once everything is settled. Perfect. I love how understanding you are, Evie. That's why this marriage works so well. We both prioritize each other's professional success. The irony of his words made my chest tight. Carter was praising me for being understanding about a fictional work crisis while he was apparently planning to use my real absence to destroy our marriage. I should probably get going, I said. The client wants to meet this afternoon, and I need to review all the permit documentation before then. Of course. Listen, the international roaming charges are expensive, so I might not be in touch much while I'm in Paris. Don't worry if you don't hear from me for a day or two. Another red flag. Carter was creating communication barriers that would make it difficult for me to reach him while he was supposedly in Paris. Which meant he probably wasn't going to Paris at all. That makes sense, I agreed. I'll probably be buried in permit paperwork anyway. Let's just focus on our respective work situations and reconnect when we're both back in Denver. I love you, Evie. You're the best wife a guy could ask for. The words felt like a knife twist, not because they were cruel, but because they sounded so practiced, like something he'd rehearsed as part of his transition planning, with Adriana Rodriguez. Love you too, I managed. Have a safe flight. After ending the call, I stood outside Denver International Airport, feeling like I'd just completed the most important performance of my life. Carter believed I was heading home to deal with a work crisis while he proceeded to Paris for legitimate business meetings. In reality, I was about to walk into Margaret Hobbs' law office with documentation of his systematic financial betrayal, while he was about to discover that his perfect plan had a fatal flaw. He had underestimated his wife's ability to think strategically under pressure. The phone call had revealed even more than I'd hoped. Carter wasn't just planning to divorce me, he was planning to do it while claiming to be out of the country on business, probably to create an alibi for when the papers were filed. The Patterson Group meetings were as fictional as my Morrison family permit crisis, but while his story was built on lies, mine was about to become very real. I had evidence, I had legal representation, and I had something Carter clearly hadn't counted on: the strategic thinking skills that came with building a successful business from nothing. As I walked toward the parking garage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete clarity about who was really in control of this situation. Margaret Hobbs' law office occupied the top floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the Rocky Mountains. I'd been here before when incorporating Sievers and Associates, but today the familiar space felt like a war room where I was about to plan the most important campaign of my life. "Evelyn, you look like hell," Margaret said as her assistant ushered me into her corner office. "But you also look furious, which in my experience is much more useful than devastated when dealing with situations like this." I set my laptop bag on her polished conference table and pulled out the documentation I'd printed at a FedEx office during my drive from the airport. "I need you to tell me exactly how bad this is, and what options I have for protecting myself." Margaret reviewed the bank statements, credit card transactions, and screenshots from Carter's hidden Google Drive files with the methodical attention of someone who had seen every variation of marital deception. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she absorbed the scope of Carter's planning. "Your husband has been very thorough," she said finally, setting down the papers and looking at me with a mixture of professional respect and personal anger. "This level of financial manipulation and strategic planning indicates he's been working with someone who understands both divorce law and asset protection. The good news is that he's also created a comprehensive record of his fraudulent behavior." What does that mean practically? It means that what Carter thought was careful planning may actually be evidence of financial fraud that could result in criminal charges. Moving marital assets to hidden accounts while deceiving your spouse about finances isn't just grounds for divorce, it's potentially embezzlement. Margaret opened her laptop and began typing notes with the rapid efficiency of someone building a legal strategy in real time. "The timing here is crucial. If he's planning to file divorce papers while you're out of the country, he's hoping to establish a narrative where you're an absent spouse who neglected the marriage for your career. Combined with the financial reorganization he's already completed, he could claim that your business success came at the expense of marital obligations." "But he encouraged my business success," I protested. "He supported my career development, helped me make professional connections, even suggested strategies for growing Sievers and Associates," which creates a fascinating contradiction in his approach. Margaret smiled grimly. A good divorce attorney, which I'm assuming he's planning to hire with the money he's stolen from your joint accounts, would argue that your professional dedication justified his financial repositioning. But we have documentation proving he systematically undermined your business growth while funding his divorce planning. She turned her laptop screen toward me, showing a legal document template she was already customizing. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze all joint accounts and prevent any further asset transfers. Second, we're requesting immediate discovery of any hidden accounts or financial arrangements he's made. Third, we're demanding full disclosure of his relationship with Adriana Rodriguez and any services she's provided. Can we do all that today? We can file the emergency motions today, and given the evidence of ongoing financial fraud, I'm confident the court will grant immediate provisional orders. Carter thinks he's controlling the timeline, but we're about to accelerate his schedule dramatically. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text and she glanced at it before showing me the screen. That's my process server. I had him standing by after our phone conversation. He's currently at the downtown office building where Carter's firm leases space. If your husband is really planning to fly to Paris, he'll need to stop by his office first to create evidence of his business trip story. The thoroughness of Margaret's preparation impressed me. While I'd been driving across Denver, she'd already begun implementing a legal strategy that would corner Carter before he realized his plan was compromised. What happens when he's served with papers? He'll have 24 hours to respond to the emergency motions, during which time all joint financial accounts will be frozen, and he'll be legally prohibited from making any additional asset transfers. More importantly, he'll realize that his wife isn't the naive, trusting woman he thought he was manipulating. Margaret printed several sets of documents and handed them to me for review. I need you to sign these affidavits swearing to the accuracy of your financial evidence and timeline of Carter's deceptive behavior. Everything you've documented will become part of the court record. As I signed my name to each document, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just anger about Carter's betrayal, but excitement about the possibility of beating him at his own game, using nothing but truth and strategic thinking. There's one more thing, Margaret said, pulling up a new document on her screen. I want to file a motion requesting that the court consider Carter's financial fraud as grounds for criminal charges. It's unusual in divorce proceedings, but the systematic nature of his behavior and the amounts involved make it worth pursuing.
Criminal charges?
Evelyn, your husband has stolen nearly $200,000 from your marriage while using that money to plan your financial destruction. In any other context, we'd call that embezzlement and fraud. The fact that you're married doesn't make it legal. I looked out Margaret's windows at the Denver skyline, thinking about Carter, who was probably boarding his flight right now, confident that his plan was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea that his wife was 2 miles away, signing legal documents that would transform him from predator to defendant before his plane reached cruising altitude. File everything, I said. If Carter wants to play games with legal strategy and financial manipulation, let's show him what those games look like when his opponent actually knows the rules. Walking out of Margaret's office with signed legal documents in my briefcase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete control over my own destiny. The woman who had discovered Carter's betrayal in an airport food court 3 hours ago had been operating from a position of shock and confusion. The woman stepping into the elevator now was someone entirely different, someone who had just turned her husband's own strategy against him, using nothing but evidence and strategic thinking. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Hey boss, got a weird call from Carter asking if you'd made it to Paris okay. Told him you were handling the Morrison permit crisis. Hope that was the right thing to say. I smiled, realizing that my fictional story was now being corroborated by my own staff. Carter was checking up on my cover story, which meant he was still proceeding with his plan while believing mine was legitimate. Perfect response, I texted back. I'll explain everything when I'm back in the office, but first, I had one more strategic move to make. If Carter was using our anniversary trip as cover for his deception, then I was going to use his deception as an opportunity to demonstrate exactly what he'd underestimated about his wife. I drove to Cherry Creek Mall, Denver's premier shopping destination, and headed straight to the Louis Vuitton boutique, If Carter wanted to reorganize our finances, he was about to discover that his wife understood the value of strategic spending. "I'd like to see your most exclusive travel collection," I told the sales associate, a polished woman named Claudia, who immediately recognized the confidence of someone accustomed to luxury purchases. "Of course. Are you planning something special? A business trip that's going to change my life?" I replied, which was entirely true. Within an hour, I had selected a complete luxury travel wardrobe, not because I needed expensive clothes, but because I was about to establish a new standard for how Evelyn Sievers moved through the world. The total came to nearly $15,000, exactly matching Carter's most recent payment to Adriana Rodriguez. "Would you like this charged to your personal account or business card?" Claudia asked, as she arranged the elegant bags. "Business card," I said firmly. "This is a professional investment. This is a professional investment." From Louis Vuitton, I walked to the Apple Store and purchased the most advanced laptop and tablet setup they offered, tools that would allow me to work effectively from anywhere, while maintaining the mobile flexibility that running an international architectural practice would require. Another $8,000, matching another Rodriguez payment. But the most important stop was the American Express Platinum Card office in the mall's Financial Services Center. I had always qualified for their premium travel benefits through my business income, but had never applied because Carter handled our credit arrangements and claimed the annual fees weren't worth it. "I'd like to apply for your Centurion card," I told the financial advisor, presenting documentation of Sievers and Associates' revenue and my personal credit history. Within 30 minutes, I was approved for American Express's most exclusive card, with travel benefits that included automatic first-class upgrades, access to private airport lounges worldwide, and concierge services that could arrange anything from last-minute restaurant reservations to private jet charters. "Your card will be expedited and delivered tomorrow," the advisor explained. "In the meantime, we can provide you with a temporary card for immediate use." As I walked back to my car, laden with shopping bags and carrying financial tools that reflected my true economic status, rather than the artificial constraints Carter had created, I realized something profound had shifted. For months, I had been living within the financial boundaries Carter had established while he secretly spent our money on divorce planning. Now I was spending strategically to establish the lifestyle and professional infrastructure that matched my actual capabilities. My phone rang as I loaded the bags into my car. Julia Owen's name appeared on the screen, calling from Paris. "Evie, I got your message about needing to delay the meeting. Is everything okay?" I paused, looking across the parking lot at the Denver skyline where my future was being rebuilt in real time. "Actually, Julia, I think I'm going to be able to make it after all. The situation here resolved more quickly than expected." "That's wonderful. The developers are really excited to meet with you. Your portfolio is exactly what they've been looking for." "Perfect. I'll be there tomorrow evening as planned." "And Julia, I think this meeting is going to go even better than we originally hoped." After ending the call, I opened my laptop and booked a first-class ticket to Paris on the next available flight. Not because I was running away from Carter's betrayal, but because I was running toward the international business opportunity that would establish Sievers and Associates as a global player in sustainable luxury design. Carter thought he was using our anniversary trip to create distance while he implemented his divorce strategy. In reality, he had given me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate that his wife was more resourceful, more professionally connected, and more strategically minded than he had ever imagined. The European resort project would proceed as planned. The only difference was that when I returned to Denver, it would be as the principal of an internationally recognized architectural firm, with legal protection against Carter's financial fraud, and a clear understanding of exactly what our marriage was worth. Tomorrow evening, while Carter was probably meeting with Adriana Rodriguez to celebrate the successful implementation of Phase 3 of his plan, I would be in Paris, closing the deal that would transform my career and my life. The woman who boarded that flight would no longer be the accommodating wife who accepted Carter's explanations without question. She would be someone who had discovered her own strength and was ready to use it. The next morning, I woke up in my Boulder home feeling more rested than I had in months, despite having spent the previous evening reorganizing my entire life. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Carter, and a series of increasingly frantic text messages that painted a clear picture of his deteriorating situation. Evie, I tried calling but it went straight to voicemail. Hope the permit situation is going well. Got served with some crazy legal papers at the office yesterday. My attorney says it's probably just a procedural error. Can you call me? This is serious. Someone froze our accounts, and I can't access any of our credit cards. What the hell is happening? Call me now. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this needs to stop immediately. I deleted the messages without responding and focused on preparing for my trip to Paris. The woman who had been answering Carter's calls with explanations and accommodations no longer existed. My doorbell rang at 8 a.m. sharp. Margaret's process server delivering the temporary restraining order that officially prohibited Carter from accessing any marital assets or contacting me directly except through legal counsel. I signed for the documents with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic planning was proceeding exactly as intended. Ma'am, the process server said, I also have a message from Margaret Hobbs. She wanted you to know that your husband attempted to access your joint business account this morning and was denied. The bank has flagged his activities and is cooperating fully with the court orders. Perfect. Carter was discovering in real time that his financial control had evaporated overnight. My phone rang with Julia Owen's number, and I answered with genuine excitement for the first time in months. Evie, I have incredible news. Julia's voice crackled through the international connection. The development group moved up our meeting. They want to see you this afternoon instead of tomorrow. Apparently they reviewed your portfolio last night, and are so impressed they want to accelerate the entire timeline. That's amazing, I said, already mentally adjusting my travel schedule. What changed? They love your invisible sustainability approach, but what really caught their attention was the business model analysis you included. Most architects just show them pretty pictures. You showed them how sustainable design could actually increase their profit margins while reducing operational costs. I smiled, remembering the financial projections I'd included in my portfolio. The same analytical thinking that had helped me uncover Carter's deception was now impressing international developers. There's something else, Julia continued. They want to discuss expanding the project scope. Instead of 12 properties, they're considering 24 locations across Europe and potentially some in Asia. Evie, this could be worth tens of millions in design contracts. 24 properties. The scale was beyond anything I had imagined when I'd started preparing for this meeting. It would require expanding Sievers and Associates dramatically, probably opening international offices and hiring senior architects with global experience. I'll be on the next flight, I said, already opening my laptop to check departure times. Julia, this timing is perfect in ways you can't imagine. After ending the call, I realized that Carter's betrayal had inadvertently created the ideal circumstances for pursuing this opportunity. If I'd still been accommodating his financial constraints and emotional manipulation, I might have hesitated to commit to such an ambitious international expansion. Now, with my finances protected by court order and my self-worth no longer tied to his approval, I could make decisions based purely on what was best for my business. I called Danny to brief her on the situation, carefully editing the personal details while emphasizing the professional opportunities ahead. So Carter's not going to be involved in business decisions anymore? Danny asked, and I caught a note of relief in her voice that suggested she'd noticed the tension in our recent interactions. Carter will be focusing on his own business challenges for the foreseeable future, I said diplomatically. Sievers and Associates is moving forward with complete independence. Good, Danny said firmly. We've been ready for international expansion for months. The team is excited about the growth potential, and honestly, some of Carter's recent suggestions about scaling back our ambitions didn't make sense given our success trajectory. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Carter hadn't just been undermining me financially, he'd been subtly discouraging my business growth, probably to keep Sievers and Associates smaller and easier to undervalue in divorce proceedings. Pack your passport, I told Danny. If this Paris meeting goes well, we're going to need project management support for European operations within the next 6 months. I spent the rest of the morning coordinating with Margaret about managing the legal proceedings while I was out of the country, then drove to Denver International Airport for the second time in 2 days. This time I walked through the terminal with the confident stride of someone who belonged in first-class lounges and international business meetings. At the American Express Centurion Lounge, I settled into a private workspace with my new laptop and began refining my presentation for the expanded project scope. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the same airport where I'd discovered Carter's betrayal to prepare for the meeting that would establish my financial independence from him permanently. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Adriana Rodriguez. We need to talk about your husband's situation. I think there are things you should know." I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Whatever Adriana Rodriguez wanted to discuss could wait until after I'd secured the contracts that would make Sievers and Associates a global player in sustainable luxury design. Carter and his divorce consultant were about to discover that they had severely underestimated the woman they thought they were manipulating. The first-class cabin of United Flight 924 to Paris was everything I had imagined it would be when booking luxury travel for my clients, but had never experienced myself. As I settled into seat 2A with a glass of champagne, I couldn't help but smile at the irony that I was finally living the lifestyle my business had been creating for others, funded by the freedom that came from Carter's spectacular miscalculation. "First time in first class?" asked the passenger in 2B, a distinguished man in his 40s with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to premium travel. "First time in a lot of things," I replied, then looked more closely at his face. Something about his smile was familiar in a way that made my heart skip. Louis Hobbs? Evie Sievers," he said, his face breaking into the same grin I remembered from college 20 years ago. "I can't believe it. What are the odds?" Louis Hobbs had been my study partner in structural engineering classes at the University of Colorado, back when I was still figuring out that architecture was my true calling. We'd spent countless hours in the library working through complex calculations, and I'd harbored a secret crush on him for most of junior year before he graduated and moved to Chicago for flight training. "Are you still flying?" I asked, noting the captain's stripes on his uniform jacket hanging in the overhead compartment. "Captain for United now," he said proudly. "Actually, I'm flying this route, just deadheading back to Paris after flying the overnight eastbound. What about you? Last I heard through the alumni network, you'd started your own architectural firm, Sievers and Associates," I confirmed. "We specialize in sustainable luxury design. Actually, I'm heading to Paris for what could be the biggest meeting of my career." "That's incredible. I always knew you'd do something amazing with that brilliant analytical mind of yours." His expression grew more serious. "Flying alone though? I seem to remember you were married to another architect." The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that Louis had probably just witnessed my husband's absence in ways that required explanation. In the old version of my life, I would have made excuses for Carter, created fictional explanations that protected his reputation while minimizing my own importance. "Carter and I are going through some changes," I said simply. "It turns out that building a successful business sometimes reveals incompatibilities that weren't apparent earlier in a marriage." Louis nodded with the understanding of someone who had probably seen his share of relationship complexities through 2 decades of adult life. "I'm sorry to hear that, but also not entirely surprised. You were always too ambitious and too principled to settle for anything less than genuine partnership." His words hit me with unexpected force, because they described exactly what I had been missing in my marriage without realizing it. Carter had supported my career in theory, while systematically undermining it in practice. He had claimed to be my partner while secretly planning my financial destruction. "What about you?" I asked, steering the conversation toward safer territory. "Wife, kids, house in the suburbs. Divorced 3 years ago," Louis said with a wry smile. "Turns out that pilot schedules aren't compatible with everyone's lifestyle expectations. No kids, which probably made everything easier in the long run. These days I'm focused on flying international routes and seeing parts of the world I missed during my marriage." The flight attendant approached to offer dinner service, and Louis requested to move his meal to the galley area so he could catch up with an old friend without disturbing other passengers. I found myself accepting the invitation with an eagerness that surprised me. "So tell me about this big meeting in Paris," Louis said as we settled into the galley's small seating area with our meals. I explained the European eco-resort project, the potential for 24 properties across multiple countries, and the way the opportunity had evolved from a single meeting into what could be a complete transformation of my business model. "That's incredible, Evie. You're talking about building an international architectural practice from scratch. Most people would be terrified by that level of expansion." 6 months ago, I would have been terrified, I admitted. I would have spent weeks discussing it with Carter, analyzing the risks, probably talking myself out of taking the leap. And now I realized that the biggest risk was staying small to accommodate someone else's limitations. The words came out with more honesty than I had intended, but Louis's expression suggested he understood exactly what I meant. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I fly the Paris-Denver route twice a month. If you end up establishing European operations, I could probably provide some interesting insights about international business travel logistics." "Are you offering professional consulting services, Captain Hobbs?" "I'm offering to help an old friend who's about to do something remarkable," he said with a smile that made me remember why I'd had that college crush, "and maybe hoping that we could catch up properly when our schedules allow." As we returned to our seats for landing, I realized that my chance encounter with Louis represented something I hadn't experienced in years. A conversation with someone who saw my ambitions as exciting rather than threatening, who understood professional demands rather than resenting them, and who remembered the person I had been before I started accommodating Carter's insecurities. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and I gathered my belongings with the confidence of someone whose life had just taken an unexpected turn toward possibilities I hadn't even considered 24 hours earlier. Carter had planned to use this trip to destroy our marriage while I was safely out of the country. Instead, I was about to close the business deal that would establish my financial independence while reconnecting with someone who reminded me what genuine support looked like. The George V Hotel in Paris was exactly the kind of establishment where I had always imagined conducting international business: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the quiet efficiency of staff accustomed to serving clients whose time was worth thousands of dollars per hour. I checked into my suite with the confidence of someone who finally understood that she deserved this level of service, then immediately called Julia Owen to confirm our meeting details. "Evie, perfect timing," Julia said. "I'm in the lobby with Henri Dubois, the lead developer, and his team. They're so excited to meet you that they've asked if we could start with cocktails now and then move to dinner. Is that too much for your first day?" "Actually, that sounds perfect. I'm ready when you are." I changed into one of my new outfits, a tailored blazer and dress combination that struck exactly the right balance between American professionalism and European sophistication, and headed downstairs with my presentation materials and the confidence that came from having spent the flight mentally preparing for the most important pitch of my career. The hotel's bar was elegantly appointed with leather chairs and low tables that provided perfect spaces for spreading out architectural plans. Julia stood as I approached, accompanied by 3 men who looked like they belonged in a luxury lifestyle magazine, sophisticated, successful, and clearly accustomed to making decisions that involved millions of euros. "Evie, I'd like you to meet Henri Dubois," Julia said, gesturing to a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of understated confidence that came with building successful businesses across multiple industries. "Henri, this is Evelyn Sievers, the architect whose work convinced you to accelerate this entire timeline." Henri stood and extended his hand with the firm grip of someone who had made his fortune by recognizing exceptional talent quickly. "You, Miss Sievers, I must tell you that your portfolio was the most compelling presentation we've received from any architect in 10 years of development projects. Your approach to sustainable luxury is exactly what the hospitality industry needs." "Thank you," I replied, settling into the chair they'd reserved for me. "I have to say that this project represents everything I've been working toward: the opportunity to prove that environmental responsibility can enhance rather than compromise the luxury experience." Henri's associate, introduced as Philippe Moreau, the project's financial director, leaned forward with obvious interest. We've reviewed your cost analysis projections, and frankly, they're more sophisticated than what we usually see from architectural firms. Most designers focus on aesthetics and leave the business model development to others. I learned early in my career that beautiful design without financial viability is just expensive art, I said, opening my laptop to display the updated projections I'd refined during the flight. Sustainable architecture only succeeds when it creates measurable value for developers, operators, and guests. For the next hour, I walked them through my vision for their resort properties, individual villa suites that felt like private mountain homes, while meeting five-star hospitality standards, common areas that captured the intimacy of residential entertaining spaces, and infrastructure systems that would reduce operational costs by 30%, while eliminating the property's carbon footprint entirely. The key insight, I explained, showing them detailed renderings of the Aspen project, is that guests are willing to pay premium rates for accommodations that feel authentically residential rather than institutionally luxurious. They want to experience how they would live if they could afford the most beautiful, environmentally responsible homes in the world. Henri nodded thoughtfully, then exchanged glances with his team that suggested they were making real-time decisions about the project's scope. Miss Evers, we've been considering expanding this project significantly. Instead of 12 properties, we're now looking at 24 locations across Europe, with potential expansion into Asia and North America. Would Severs and Associates be prepared to handle that level of growth? This was the moment I had been preparing for, not just during the flight, but through years of building my business with exactly this opportunity in mind. 6 months ago, I would have hesitated, worried about overcommitting or disappointing clients with ambitious timelines. Today, I felt nothing but excitement about the challenge. We would need to establish European operations and hire additional senior architects, I said, but that's exactly the kind of growth that would allow us to develop the most innovative sustainable luxury designs in the world. This scale would justify investing in cutting-edge environmental technologies and materials that smaller projects can't support. Philippe pulled out his phone and began typing notes rapidly. We're talking about design contracts worth approximately 40 million euros over the next 3 years, with ongoing consulting relationships for each property's operational optimization. Are you prepared to discuss those terms? 40 million euros. The number was beyond anything I had imagined when I'd started preparing for this meeting, but I felt completely calm as I considered the implications. This contract would establish Severs and Associates as a global leader in sustainable luxury design, while providing the financial independence that would make my divorce from Carter entirely irrelevant to my future. I'm absolutely prepared to discuss those terms, I said. In fact, I think you'll find that Severs and Associates is ready to exceed your expectations in ways that will set new standards for the entire hospitality industry. As Henri signaled the waiter for another round of drinks, I realized that Carter's betrayal had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for me to pursue this opportunity with complete focus and ambition. While he was probably meeting with Adriana Rodriguez to celebrate the successful implementation of his divorce strategy, I was about to sign contracts that would make his financial manipulation completely irrelevant to my future success. 2 days later, I was back at Denver International Airport. But this time I walked through the terminal with signed contracts worth 40 million euros in my briefcase, and the confidence of someone who had just established herself as a global player in sustainable luxury design. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from Carter, each more desperate than the last. "Evie, where are you? I got back from Paris and you're not home. The lawyers are saying crazy things about financial fraud. This is all some kind of misunderstanding. I know you're angry about something, but we can work this out. Just call me, Evie. Adriana says you hired Margaret Hobbs. What the hell is going on?" I smiled at that last message. So Adriana Rodriguez was finally earning her consulting fee by delivering the news that Carter's perfect plan had been completely dismantled by his wife's superior strategic thinking. As I approached the baggage claim area, I saw him before he saw me. Carter was pacing near the international arrivals gate, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in ways that suggested he'd been running damage control for days without success. When he finally spotted me, his face went through the same series of expressions I'd seen in the airplane aisle: confusion, recognition, and dawning realization that he was facing someone very different from the woman he thought he'd been manipulating. "Evie," he said, approaching with the tentative steps of someone who no longer understood the rules of engagement. "Thank God you're okay. I've been worried sick. Your phone's been going straight to voicemail, and when I got back from Paris, I interrupted, setting down my Louis Vuitton luggage with deliberate grace. How was your business trip, Carter? Did you get everything accomplished that you'd planned?" His eyes darted from my obvious luxury purchases to the confident way I was carrying myself, clearly trying to process how his wife had transformed so completely in just a few days. "The Patterson meetings were complicated," he said, sticking to his fictional story even though we both knew it was pointless now. "But Evie, we need to talk about these legal papers. Margaret Hobbs is making accusations that don't make any sense." "Actually, they make perfect sense," I replied, pulling out my phone to show him a photo of the signed European contracts. "While you were supposedly in Paris handling complicated Patterson meetings, I was actually in Paris closing the deal that just made Sievers and Associates an international architectural firm worth approximately $50 million. Carter's face went pale as he absorbed the implications. His plan had been to leave me financially vulnerable while he maintained control of our assets. Instead, he had inadvertently freed me to pursue the opportunity that made his financial manipulation completely irrelevant. $50 million, he whispered. "Give or take," I said casually. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not being systematically undermined by someone who's supposed to be your partner." I started walking toward the exit, leaving him standing in the middle of the airport with the expression of someone who had just realized he'd lost a game he thought he was winning. "Carter," I called over my shoulder, "your things are packed and waiting on the front porch. Margaret will be in touch about the financial fraud charges. I'd suggest you get a very good attorney." The woman who walked out of that airport was no longer the accommodating wife who had believed his lies. She was someone who had discovered exactly what she was worth, and it was far more than Carter had ever imagined. 1 week later, I sat in the newly renovated conference room of Sievers and Associates, watching Danny coordinate with our European partners via video conference while reviewing architectural plans that would reshape luxury hospitality across 3 continents. The transformation of my business had been swift and decisive. Within days of returning from Paris, we'd hired 2 senior architects, leased additional office space, and established partnerships with construction firms in France, Italy, and Switzerland. The Geneva property broke ground yesterday, Henri Dubois reported from his office in Paris, his image crystal clear on our new international communication system. "Your environmental systems design is generating tremendous interest from other developers. We've had 3 unsolicited inquiries about licensing your sustainable luxury approach for projects outside our partnership." I smiled, making notes about the licensing opportunities that could add another revenue stream to our expanding operations. "That's exactly what we hoped would happen, Henri. Sievers and Associates is ready to discuss those licensing arrangements whenever you are." As the call ended, my phone buzzed with a text from Louis Hobbs, "Flying into Denver tomorrow afternoon. Coffee when I land. I have some interesting intel about the hospitality industry connections we discussed." The professional relationship with Louis had developed naturally over the past week, with his insights about international travel logistics proving invaluable as we planned our European operations. But there was also something personal developing, conversations that extended beyond business, shared memories that reminded me what genuine partnership felt like. "How does it feel to be running an international architectural firm?" Danny asked as she gathered the presentation materials from our video conference. "Surprisingly natural," I replied, which was entirely true. The confidence and strategic thinking that had helped me outmaneuver Carter's financial betrayal were exactly the skills required to manage rapid business expansion across multiple countries. My phone rang with Margaret Hobbs' number, and I answered expecting an update about the divorce proceedings. "Evelyn, I have some interesting news about your husband's situation," Margaret said, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had just won a significant legal victory. "Carter's attorney contacted me this morning requesting a settlement conference. Apparently, the financial fraud charges have made him realize that fighting this divorce isn't in his best interest." "What kind of settlement is he proposing?" Complete asset forfeiture of everything he moved to hidden accounts, plus penalties for the financial fraud. He's also agreed to waive any claim to Sievers and Associates or its future revenues. Essentially, he wants to walk away with as little legal exposure as possible. I leaned back in my chair, processing the irony. Carter had spent months planning to leave me financially devastated, and now he was begging to escape with minimal consequences for his systematic betrayal. And Adriana Rodriguez. Her business is being investigated by the state attorney general for potential involvement in financial fraud schemes. Apparently, your husband wasn't her only client who used her services to hide assets from spouses. She may be facing criminal charges herself. After ending the call, I stood at my office window overlooking downtown Denver, watching the city where I'd built my business and was now rebuilding my life. Carter's betrayal had been devastating when I discovered it, but it had also freed me to pursue opportunities I might never have had the courage to attempt while accommodating his limitations. The woman who had boarded that first-class flight to Paris was someone Carter had never really known, someone capable of building international business relationships, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, and creating the life she actually deserved. Tomorrow, I would have coffee with Louis and continue building something genuine. Today, I had an international architectural practice to run. 6 months later, I stood in the first-class cabin of United Flight 924 to Paris, but this time I wasn't traveling alone. Louis adjusted his captain's hat as he prepared for our departure, while I reviewed architectural plans for the Monte Carlo resort that would be the crown jewel of our European collection. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal in this same airport was now someone who traveled internationally twice a month, managing projects across 4 countries while building both a business empire and a relationship based on genuine partnership. "Ready for another European adventure, Miss Sievers?" Louis asked with the smile that had made me remember what authentic support looked like. "Always," I replied, settling into seat 2A with the confidence of someone who belonged in first-class cabins and international boardrooms. "Henri wants to discuss the Asian expansion over dinner in Paris, and I have site visits scheduled in Switzerland and Italy." The European resort project had exceeded every projection we'd made during that first meeting at the George V Hotel. 24 properties were now in various stages of development, with Sievers and Associates serving as the principal architectural firm for what industry publications were calling the most innovative sustainable luxury hospitality project in the world. The licensing deals Henri had mentioned had materialized into partnerships with developers in Japan, Australia, and Costa Rica. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny, who was now managing our Denver headquarters while I oversaw international operations. "The Forbes article comes out next week. They're calling you the architect who revolutionized luxury hospitality through invisible sustainability." Also, 3 more licensing inquiries came in today. I smiled, remembering how Carter had discouraged me from pursuing media attention because it might make clients think I was too successful to give their projects personal attention. The Forbes feature would establish Sievers and Associates as the global leader in sustainable luxury design, exactly the kind of recognition that would attract the most ambitious projects in the world. As we reached cruising altitude, Louis joined me in the first-class cabin during his break, carrying coffee and the easy conversation that had become the foundation of our developing relationship. "Any word from Carter lately?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "Margaret finalized the divorce last month," I said, feeling nothing but relief about closing that chapter completely. "He's apparently working for a small Denver firm now, handling residential additions and renovations. Adriana Rodriguez is serving 18 months for financial fraud conspiracy. And you're designing resorts that will host European royalty while revolutionizing the environmental standards in luxury hospitality," Louis said with obvious pride. "I'd say that's what they call poetic justice." Looking out the window at the Atlantic Ocean below, I reflected on how Carter's betrayal had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for me to discover exactly what I was capable of achieving. His plan to control and diminish me had freed me to become someone more successful, more confident, and more genuinely happy than I'd ever imagined possible. The woman who had believed his lies about financial constraints while he stole our money was now someone who spent more on a single business trip than he'd stolen in total. The woman who had accommodated his insecurities was now building international partnerships based on mutual respect and shared ambition. Tomorrow, I would sign contracts for the Tokyo Resort project. Tonight, I would have dinner in Paris with people who valued my expertise. And somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized that Carter's greatest betrayal had been his greatest gift, the opportunity to discover that I had never needed his approval to be extraordinary. The plane descended toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, carrying me toward a future that was entirely my own creation. Standing on the terrace of the newly completed resort in Monaco, overlooking the Mediterranean, while architects from 3 continents presented their latest sustainable innovations to European hospitality leaders, I felt something I had never experienced during 15 years of marriage to Carter. Complete satisfaction with the life I had built. The carbon-negative certification came through this morning, Julia Owen announced, joining me with champagne as the sun set over Monte Carlo. This property is officially generating more clean energy than it consumes, while maintaining the luxury standards that justify charging €3,000 per night. I smiled, watching guests arrive in luxury vehicles that would be charged by the resort's own solar array, staying in villa suites that demonstrated how environmental responsibility could enhance, rather than compromise, the most sophisticated hospitality experience in the world. Every design element I had envisioned during that first meeting in Paris had been realized, and the results were exceeding even my most ambitious projections. 28 properties now, I mused, reviewing the global map on my tablet that showed Sievers and Associates projects spanning 6 continents, with inquiries coming in faster than we can evaluate them. Luis appeared beside me, having just completed the flight that brought this month's group of international investors to tour our flagship properties. Over the past year, our professional partnership had evolved into something deeply personal, a relationship based on mutual respect for each other's ambitions, rather than accommodation of insecurities. The Singapore project approval came through, he said, handing me a message from our Asian partners. They want to break ground on the sustainable luxury resort that will set new standards for environmentally responsible hospitality in Southeast Asia. I looked around at the gathering of architects, developers, environmental scientists, and hospitality executives who had come to study what we'd accomplished in Monaco. These were people who understood that sustainability and luxury weren't opposing forces, but complementary elements of thoughtful design that could influence entire industries. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny in Denver. The documentary crew wants to schedule your interview about transforming business betrayal into entrepreneurial breakthrough. They're calling it From Deception to Design: How Financial Fraud Freed an Architect to Revolutionize Luxury Hospitality. Sound good? I laughed, thinking about how Carter's systematic betrayal had accidentally created the perfect conditions for me to pursue opportunities I might never have had the courage to attempt while accommodating his limitations. His plan to leave me financially devastated had instead freed me to build something worth more than he could have imagined stealing. Perfect timing, I replied. Schedule it for next month when I'm back from the Tokyo property launch. As the evening progressed and conversations flowed between languages and currencies and architectural philosophies that would shape the future of sustainable luxury, I realized that Carter had given me the greatest gift possible: the opportunity to discover that I had never needed his approval, his financial control, or his version of our marriage to become exactly who I was meant to be. The woman who had discovered his betrayal in an airport food court had thought her world was ending. The woman standing on this Monaco terrace understood that it had actually been the beginning of everything she'd been capable of achieving all along. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most extraordinary transformations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.